It's pretty neat to see. I bought a book last night. Celeste was laughing at me about buying it, but the Poet of Airedale was in our family line, which is pretty cool. They say that his poetry helped design much of how civilization is organized. I was like, that's pretty cool. I couldn't handle that, but that's neat that he did that. So I bought the book. I want to read it. He and others, they were once, what was it? He was a Methodist, others were so on. Well, anyway, they ended up becoming Baptist preachers. I was like, yes. Yeah. I was pretty excited about that. I'm sure they would be excited today to see some of their seed still abiding in the faith and doing what they were doing, right? They'd probably be excited. Imagine David and others, how they feel when they see their seed and what they're doing. The seed was promised. The seed promise of the Abrahamic covenant is the center of the Davidic covenant. I'll say that again. The seed promise of the Abrahamic covenant is the center of the Davidic covenant. And this promise amplifies. Let me just see how I think I have a typo. The promise amplified includes the kingdom, the house or lineage of David, and the throne. So the importance of the Davidic covenant. This covenant brings to light some questions that are crucial to our eschatological understandings. Anybody remember what eschatological means? End time stuff. End time stuff. There we go. This is crucial to your understanding of end time stuff. Right? I should just start writing it that way. But I sound so much smarter this way. I'm just kidding. Questions such as, will there be literal millennium? Are questions that pop up. The way that you understand this covenant, the way you understand its interpretation will change the way you think about these things. Another question that pops up is the church, the kingdom spoken of? Another would be, what is God's kingdom? Another would be, what is Christ's kingdom? Now, you guys should know that just from the preaching we've been having lately, at least parts of it, right? Because we don't always, I was talking, I think it was Robbie I was talking with the other day, or maybe it was my mother-in-law too. I asked her what she had heard preached at her church, and she was like, it's hard to remember sometimes. And I was like, she ended up remembering. Good job. I was like, but sometimes I don't remember what I say on Sunday, right? I forget by the time the week goes on. We should know at least some of this. The kingdom, Christ's kingdom, the kingdom of Christ is his throne established, or his authority established, is maybe how I should say that. God's kingdom is everything, his rule over everything. The church kingdom is the keys that he's given us to work in those, the kingdom of man. Well, is the kingdom being spoken of, though, in this covenant, is it present or future? In other words, is it happening right then, or is it something that was going to happen later? It was both in David's life. David was in power, but there's also something that's coming later. So it was kind of like a partial fulfillment of what God was saying. It's going to come later. Well, these issues can only be decided by a correct interpretation of that which was covenanted to David. So a New Testament confirmation of these promises can be found in Revelation 20, verses 1 through 6. It says, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that, he must be loosed a little season." This is what I'm talking about, where I said there would be some that live during that time and will be deceived and will turn away from Christ. When he looses that devil, he allows him to go free at the end of the 1,000 years, and he goes out and he deceives some of those nations. This is let's see here, "He shall be loosed a little season. And I saw thrones, and they that sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years." That's a future picture of the fulfillment. It demonstrates God's literal promises regarding that covenant. There was nothing that says like a, or as a, or unto a, back online. Cool. Is it on the same one or is it a different one? Whatever. So maybe I can edit them and put them together. This text is a literal fulfillment of what God had promised David. So when we look at David, we say, was it fulfilled then? Well, obviously not, because God says it's going to be fulfilled later, right, in Revelation 20. And so the importance of the Davidic covenant is that it expands upon the seed and tells us that there is a future kingdom that's coming, that's on its way. And so the provisions of the Davidic covenant, the promise made by God can be found in 2 Samuel. In 2 Samuel 7, 12 through 16. It says, and when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. And he shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before thee. And thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. Well, we know that David, being a man of war, he was not permitted to build the house of God. You may not know that, but we know that David, being a guy of war, clearing out land, killing some people unjustly, he was told, you cannot build God's house. You cannot build God's temple. He said, but your son will. I will use Solomon to do it. And so David, still being honorable, gathers up materials for his son to do those things. Pretty cool. But David was not permitted to build the house of God on his own. We see God honor the promise by allowing David's seed to do it. And so we're going to look at provisions for the continuance of his promises to David. The first one that we have there, I think it's A in your notes, is David would have a son who would succeed him, and that would establish his kingdom. In verse 12, he had said, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, and I will set up thy seed after thee. So David would have a son who would become king after him and would establish that kingdom. Well, wait a second. We just read in Revelation 20 that it's a future kingdom. So what's it talking about? A continuance of the kingdom. David was anointed king. Does anybody know, was he made king immediately after when he was anointed? Did he immediately possess the material throne? No. Saul reigned, and Saul still had material possession of that throne. Did that diminish the fact that God had made David king? No. God anointed him king. He just didn't have physical possession of that throne yet. And so that kingdom is not gone, and Jesus Christ himself will come down. He will kind of establish again that millennial reign, that millennial kingdom. But he says that he was going to establish this promise, and it was going to continue through his seed. Well, this son of David would build God's temple. That's the next one, point B. The son of David would build God's temple. We see that in verse 13 where he says, he shall build a house for my name. We see in point C. Let me know if I go too fast, because I don't think I put those in your guys' notes. We see in point C, the throne of David's family line would be established forever. In point D, the throne would not be taken away, even though Solomon's conduct would justify doing so. We see that, let's see if I can explain it right. Solomon ends up marrying a multitude of ladies, like a ton. He's got a ridiculous amount of wives, right? And then those wives, they were involved in paganism. And he began to take little bits of their paganism and bring it into his life. And God says, I'm not going to take away your position, but you're not going to stay in power. You're not going to continue in power here. And so he ends up losing power over time. You know, Israel gets, they lose their power over time, and they get where they are today is kind of where we see them at, where they don't have possession of all their land. They don't have all the power they had. But does that diminish any of the promise? It's the whole reason why I mentioned David. David was anointed king, and as far as God is concerned, David was king. David owns all that stuff, or not owns, but had the authority over that stuff. But he was not yet in physical, he did not yet have physical grasp of that throne. I see that the same as what's coming. That family line still is due the throne, but Christ is the one to have it. We know that Christ is that seed of David that was born, and some would say this: if Christ came and he was that seed, born in the flesh, and given the power over this kingdom, then when it says that he sits at the right hand of the Father, then that throne is established and that's it forever. That's a different throne. It's not the throne being spoken of when it talks about the millennial reign. And so there is a physical throne that must be sat upon. And the millennial reign, Christ reigns in person. We know that David will have authority at that time. We know that there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into this that we'll see as we get further into the study. But for now to know that's just because that seed, we don't see them as a king right now. We don't see them sitting on a throne. We don't see Christ physically on a throne. And so it can be hard to grasp. But it doesn't diminish the fact of what's coming. Am I making any sense to anybody? It makes sense in here, but I don't know if I'm getting out of here. And so it doesn't diminish from what's coming, is my point. D, the throne would not be taken away, even though Solomon's conduct would justify doing so. We talked about that. David's house, his throne, and his kingdom would be established forever. Again, kind of repetitive of the other points, but that's what's in the text. That's in verse 16. The essential features, eschatologically, end timesy, is that the things that we see in this covenant are shown in these three words: the house, the kingdom, and the throne. I'll read what I wrote here. The term house refers to his descendants or family line. The term throne refers to the power and authority that would be given to his family, and not necessarily always a physical throne. I.e., an example, the one I just talked about David and Saul. I'm just reading you my notes straight up for what I have here. The last term found is kingdom. And that means that the Davidic line would always maintain the right to authority over Israel, as seen in Psalm 89:3. Last week I made mention that the Palestinians have no right, no authority, no power to claim the land that they're claiming over there by Israel. This is why I'm saying it. They have no right, they have no power, they have no authority. Israel has all right, has all power, has all authority over that land. And they have every right to tell them to get out or to stay there, but acknowledge them as the ones in power. And they have every right to do so. And it's made obvious in Psalm 89. We see the provision of God's promise and the power given in Psalm 89, verses 34 through 36. He says, "My covenant will I not break, nor alter the things that has gone out of my lips. Once I have sworn by my holiness that I will not lie unto David. His seed shall endure forever, and his throne as the sun before me." God says, hey, I'm not going to drop this thing. I've made this promise. It's coming to pass. It's going to be fulfilled. It's coming. It's on its way. And to us as a people, we can look and say, I don't see it happening now, which means what? It's going to happen. If everything else in God's word has been fulfilled literally and has been continued literally, then we should fully expect it to be fulfilled later, literally, right? There we go. Well, God continues to refer to his promise all throughout the scriptures. I gave you guys some scriptures on your notes there, I think. It should say a little thing with a bunch of stuff. It has Isaiah 9, 6 through 7. It has Jeremiah 23, 5 through 6. Jeremiah 30, 8 through 9. Jeremiah 33, 14 through 17. Is that at the bottom of this little section? Okay, good. And there's a bunch of other ones. Those all have to do with that topic. Some of them are really repetitive. It's the whole reason why I'm not reading each one to you. It is good to read them. I'm not diminishing the importance of what they say.